This story happened to a guy who works at my local gun store way back in 1976. Please keep in mind that the gun laws in 1970s Canada versus 2018 Canada were drastically different to the point where civilians owned and used machine guns regularly. Let's begin. For safety reasons, because this man still owns those weapons under register and license, I will be changing his name to John for the purpose of this story. It was July of 1976. John had closed up gun shop for the week to take a break and go camping with his friends to a regular spot they went yearly. They were going camping in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, which are a beautiful place to be. He took with him 2 co-workers from the shop at the time and 2 other close family friends. They packed some beers and of course their guns and tents. They set out on a 4-hour drive north and arrived later that day at around noon or 1 o'clock. They drove their trucks down some forestry roads for a good 30 kilometers into the Whack Woods. This was because despite machine guns being legal, police and conservation officers at the time would still often bother you if you were using them. They got in and began to pitch their tents, which mainly consisted of old World War II or Korean War military tents, and stored their firearms and tents with them in a large box. They spent the day doing some shooting at just about whatever they wanted with the exception of live animals. A few beers later, and a cooked dinner, they decided to pack it in for the night at around 11 p.m. The first night, none of the men woke up. However, when they woke up around 7 a.m., they found a huge amount of grass in the clearing that they had set up in the area pressed down. The trail of that grass leading up into the bush was directly to their north as well. This raised a few eyebrows, but they attributed it to deer. During the day's hiking to some shooting spots, they stumbled upon a bog in the middle of the trail, which had not been there the year before. In the mud, they noticed a very large footprint, just shy of being 2 feet long, imprinted in the mud at the edge of the bog. Upon further inspection of the area, they could see the faint outline of the same size footprint almost 5 feet behind it in the dry ground. The footprints continued straight into the bog and out the other side. John and his friends were packing serious firepower at the time. John was carrying a Belgian-made F-10 FAL battle rifle. All men carried automatic weapons except for one, so they seemed very confident in dealing with an angry animal if it attacked. They continued on and into a valley about 1 kilometer away. While walking down the valley, they caught a glimpse of something peeking down at them from above a ridge. About 3 minutes of walking, a large boulder about the size of a pizza box came down, flying at them with great speed. It was followed by a noise John said he could never forget, which was a blood-curdling scream and growl. Coming from down the valley floor, further away, was another scream, which replied to the first. The men quickly turned back, realizing that there was 2 of them, as all of them loaded their magazines and ammunition to their weapon. They made it back to their clearing by sundown, only to find that their tents had been torn to shreds and everything was scattered about their camp and torn open. One of the trucks had also had a smashed back window and huge dent in the side door, which rendered it useless and unopenable. The men quickly pierced together, began to figure out what was happening. John had always been a believer in Bigfoots and was now positive that they were dealing with one. About a minute later, a friend of John's raised his AKM assault rifle and fired a few shots to the other side of the clearing, saying he saw something huge and black run behind a fallen tree over atop of a ditch. The men then fired a huge volley of gunfire into the tree and suppressed the ditch and tree. As the fire stopped, the same kind of scream was heard from behind the fallen tree. At that moment, from the east of the clearing, a huge creature stepped into it. John described it as being 7 to 8 feet tall and was covered in pitch black hair. It was heavily matted. Its face was ape-like according to him. He estimated that the creature weighed easily 600 pounds. Without hesitation, John fired his FAL at it. Now, for anyone who has a lot of knowledge of firearms, knows that the FAL fires a very large 7.62 times 51 millimeter bullet. On full auto, the weapon was hard to control, but John estimated that at least 5 of his shots connected, not to mention the barrage of bullets from 5 men, which 4 of whom had machine guns, quickly cut this creature down. He claimed to have killed it. The sight was something to see, he said, as the creature had been hit over 45 times by various calibers of bullets that were designed to kill humans, and nothing else, as they were made for military weapons. All the men immediately jumped into their trucks and sped off to get a forest ranger from the nearest station. Upon returning to the next morning, the body was gone. However, the ruins of their camp were still there, along with an incredible amount of blood left from the creature.
Let me start off by saying, before this experience, I did not believe in Bigfoot. I always assumed that if it was real, some hunter would have killed one by now. I live in deep East Texas. My 2 friends and I'll call them John and Josie, were heading to what Josie had referred to as the spot. It was only about a 45-minute drive, and the sun had just set as we pulled into a parking lot in the middle of the woods. John and I had never been here before, nor did we realize the reason why Josie had taken us here. As we get out, we notice an expensive-looking SUV that had all the gear on it that you see on those phony TV shows Bigfoot hunters use. As we pass them by, Josie decides to ask the 2 middle-aged men, who were now standing beside the vehicle, what they were doing. They replied in the most blunt of matter-of-fact way that you could say, looking for Bigfoot. John and I nearly couldn't control our laughter when the man said this. We are East Texas natives, yet had never seen or heard anything of that couldn't be explained by the many animals Texas has to offer. After a short, unconvincing conversation about Bigfoot being real, the 2 men decided to join us on the trails. They each carried them night vision goggles, heat-sensing goggles, a red flashlight, and a Glock 45 handgun, among other things. The 2 men now, persistent on turning John and I into believers, followed us behind, making the best use of their equipment. After about a mile, the wooden stairs, then man-made posts disappear, as the trail descends gradually around 30 feet below the normal height of the trail, forming a valley of sorts. The 2 men that joined us had explained that there are a few different types. There's a large red-haired one that has a cone-shaped head. He is more aggressive, one of the pack. Then there's the gray walker, as he called it. He is the largest and the one that is most frequently seen and heard from. They know what guns are, the men explained. They're very intelligent. If they're out hunting tonight, you'll hear the coyotes first. They follow them, waiting for the scraps. They'll go crazy all at once when the kill is made, they had said. After an uneventful yet unsettling hour in the woods, we started to head back down the trail the way we came. I stopped to pee on the side of the trail, and a few others did the same since we were drinking pretty heavily. What happened next I would never forget. Off in the distance, seemingly just on the other side of the valley, came a very deep and blood-curdling sound that came from an animal I had never heard before. At this point, John and I were shaky. We had dropped everything in our hands and were standing dead still, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Then, just as the 2 men said, the coyote started going crazy like I had never heard before. Still frozen in the air, I somehow managed to make out a few words. Something along the lines of, "Are you fucking serious?" Then came the whooping call once more. This time, the coyotes went dead silent. Everything did. At that moment, the entire world was quiet. There were no more crickets. There was no more wind. Nothing. The silence was almost maddening. Within a few minutes, the sound returned, and the forest came back to life, and we continued walking the way we came. Another hour passes, and nothing more had happened. At some point, we had all asked the men about their sidearms, so they took them out and let us hold them on the way back. We had stopped and shined our flashlight on the guns to check them out. Almost immediately after doing this, we all heard a loud crash in the forest. What we all recognized as a tree breaking and falling. Yet, it didn't sound like it broke and fell. It sounded like a loud snap. Trees that are falling creak. This tree had been broken and thrown in our direction. Immediately, one of the men said, "That's our invitation out of here," in a very frightened tone. They quickly holstered their weapons and turned off their flashlights as they let us out of the woods. We got in our car and got the hell out of there.
It was 25 years ago. I lived on the reservation with my family, and I was out with some friends. We went down to the creek to have a day of reed pick. We were enjoying listening to the sounds of nature. I couldn't resist trying to catch a little frog that I saw. I reached out to catch it and it hopped away, as I was expecting. I started back and fell forward, and I think I might have even sprained my ankle. I tried to get up, but I couldn't because my foot had swelled really bad. I couldn't even take my shoe or sock off at this point. My friends came over to sit with me and figured out how we were going to get back to the adobe. There were 7 of us, and we were all too scared to walk back alone, due to our parents told us never to leave each other at any cost. We were trying to think of what we could do, and we were at a loss. We went silent, and that's when we noticed that all around the animals were silent as well. We thought nothing of it and continued to think about life and how we were going to get back to the adobe. I was apologizing for the 100th time when we heard a noise. I jumped and screamed out of pain. One of my friends grabbed my arm and told me to put my weight on her shoulders, and then the other friend joined her. I'm between my 2 friends limping along the pathway when we hear another noise, kind of like a fire popping noise, and yet no fire around for a half a mile. Well, we stopped and we listened, and then a smell so bad and nauseating overcame us. I'm not even sure how it smelled, kind of dead and rotted, yet like a fresh metallic smell mixed with a little bit of garbage. What I'd say is that we were definitely puzzled, as it ain't no Bigfoot, nor was it any wildlife we knew that smelled like that. We were really scared. My friend Scotty decided he was going to investigate. He was going to try to find out what was causing that nauseating smell. We were fixing to argue with him when the smell became so strong we all vomited and we couldn't breathe without the overwhelming, disgusting, nauseous feeling overwhelming us. You may think I'm nuts at this point, but I'm telling you this right now. This is the Great Spirit, our Creator's honest truth. When I was able to stop my nauseating and vomiting, I looked up between my friend's shoulders and saw the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. Right on the hill from us, about 1.5 yards away, stood what I can only describe as a skinwalker. He was staring towards us and making hardly any sound at all. We'd been warned about them and knew we were going to have to get away from there. I decided, pain or not, I was going to suck it up and run as best as I could. I wasn't going to let my friends go down because of me. I let go their shoulders, I took a deep breath, and I started to run as fast as I could. I really didn't know how or why, but I was confused and focused on running from him. But I barely felt the pain in my ankle at this point. We were all at a dead run down the path across the fields and finally reached the adobe. We ran in gasping for breath, and my mom and my friends' moms looked up at us asking what had happened. Why are we so freaked out, running as the hounds had been after us? Well, Sarah caught her breath first and started to ramble on about what happened. I started calming down and collapsed. I cringed from my sprained ankle. My mom came over with Mary Ann, my cousin's sister-in-law, and both started to work at my ankle. I got chided for being clumsy and trying to mess with wildlife. I was so badly in pain I wanted to scream. I asked if I could have some water. My mom gave me a little bit and told me to drink slowly, as I get sick if I drink too fast. My sister and brothers came in and were told to get to the healing herbs from the shaman. I was passing in and out of awareness, and I could barely see bits and pieces of my friends telling their stories about our ordeal. I must have passed out. When I woke up, I was in bed and my mom was sitting in a corner, churning bread to cook for dinner. She immediately came to my bedside and said the shaman had been here to see me, and he said I'll be fine, and we all should be more careful when we go out there. He doesn't think we were affected by the bad spirits. Still wonder to this day who that skinwalker was, what it wanted with us. You may not believe me, but I would tell you that don't speak or talk about anything like this. It will possess you and possibly kill you. This happened during the summer when I was in middle school. I lived out in the country at the time and was surrounded by cornfields. I was having a slumber and early birthday party since my birthday's in December. So I had a bunch of my best friends over. As a little girl, you get really excited about slumber parties and all of that. I believe this was on a Saturday, if my memory serves me right. We spent the day going down the water slide my parents had set up for me and my friends. We were having a really good time, running in and out of the sprinkler and taking turns down the slide. It was getting close to the evening and getting a little closer, so we packed up the stuff and went inside to get dried and into some nice dry clothes. After we had dinner, me and my friends went back out to play outside for a little longer before we went to bed. I don't exactly remember what we were doing, but it's a pretty good guess that we were doing cartwheels and flips on the side of the driveway in the grass next to the cornfield. I can't remember if it was me or my friends I saw at first. Out in the middle of the field was this white thing. We just kind of stared at it for a bit, and they asked me what it was. I told them it was probably a white tube that sticks out of the ground for irrigation. Then we noticed that it was starting to move. This thing was probably a mile away from us. It didn't look like a human or an animal. It was just like this white thing, kind of milky in color. Whatever we would move, this thing would just take a step toward us, and when we would move toward it, it would take a step back. This thing went on for a minute or so. Me and my friend just stood there, and this thing started getting closer and closer. We ran for the house and was trying to all fit to the doorway at the same time. We were all screaming and freaking out and told my parents what was happening. They just laughed at it and said it was probably just our imagination. So we stayed in for the rest of the night. The next day it was gone, and I've never seen it since, and that was 15 years ago.
This story was told to me by my parents as a kid. My parents grew up in a small town in northernmost part of Jefferson County in Alabama. Now, back in those days, our town was very small, and around the late 60s and early 70s, there wasn't much to do. One night, they had driven down below the bridge off of Locust Fork River, where teens would often gather. This night, no one was there yet, so they decided to wait and see who'd possibly show up. While waiting, Dad heard a slight whistling sound. He didn't pay much attention to it at first, but as time went on, it got louder and louder. Dad moved the car up the hill a little, under a streetlight, and got out as they started sounding like a little kid. Once out of the car, he could tell it was coming from the woods, down on the riverbank, and sounded like it was coming closer. He said it didn't stick around to see what it was because they left in a hurry, feeling pretty freaked out from that. The following Sunday, a friend asked if he minded going to see him and retrieving his boat that they had left on the river from a trot lining trip from Friday night. They left the boat on the bank at one of the guy's land that pooled the bottom of the river. Dad and the guy had to troll up the river to bring down both the boats. While going up the river, they came upon an abandoned campsite. Dad said it was very strange and looked as if someone left in a hurry. The tent was knocked down, the fire was still smoldering, an axe is in the tree. Coolers and other items were scattered around. But oddly, no one was there. It's as if they had left quickly, leaving everything behind. The friend of my dad made light of the empty campsite and said that whistling creature must have run them off. That's when my dad turned to him and asked him to repeat what he had just said. The friend laughed and said, "Yeah, we had some kind of crazy animal spook us a little Friday night." He said they had gotten all set up, all the lines out, and was just sitting in the boat, tied to the bank, waiting for the right time to run the lines. He said, something crossed the river, was making a sound, that same very whistling sound. He said it went down a little while, and then they didn't pay attention to it at first. But as they got ready to run the lines, the animal started following the boat down the river. He said it would come down to the water's edge, and one of the three guys who had 22 rifle for snakes, he would shoot up into the woods and the animal would go deeper, but would immediately return crashing down to the edge. He said it made all types of noises, crashing through the brush. He said it spooked them enough to call it quits early and leave the boat tied on the farm's land. That's when Dad shared with him the experience he and my mom had just a few miles down the road. No one ever associated the whistling sound with Bigfoot until a few days ago. I was watching Destination America, Terror in the Woods Season 1 Episode 3, Hunted by Bigfoot. In that show, the men both mentioned a whistling sound, also describing a sound like as if it were air leaving a tire. When I heard this recorded, and my dad, who is 67, came and watched, the look on his face afterward was priceless. He said, "That was 47 years ago," almost as if he was stunned to hear someone describe a similar creature sound like that today. I'm not sure if it was a relief to hear someone else tell a similar story that occurred in Ohio, or if it was a story he had never heard being associated with Bigfoot. Either way, my parents are very honest Christians, and lying is a no-no. What is, we may never truly know, but what it could have possibly been, well, that's just scary.
This happened directly to me. At the time of his story, I was a 12-year-old male who lived in California. For a summer trip, me and my family flew to Boise, Idaho, for a week to stay with cousins. We stayed at their house for 2 days, then came to the best part. It was the best part until what happened, that is. On the third day, we drove to a small city in the Rocky Mountains of central Idaho. They owned a cabin in Ketchum. The first day was fishing at nearby lakes, playing games, and meeting a few of the neighbors on the small street. Everyone we met was nice. It was amazing. I thought nothing could go wrong. Before I say more, here's a layout of the area. The room where I slept was at the back of the house. There was no fence at the back of the backyard because it was on the bank of a freezing cold river. Directly on the other side of the river was a huge mountain covered by thick forest of pine trees. A small path starts on the other side of the river, but there's no bridge. There's not a way that you could get across, really. I went to bed that night. I woke up at 2 a.m. needing to use the bathroom. I got up and did my thing and then headed back to my room. As I got to my bed, I felt hot, so I opened my window. Not 15 minutes after I opened my window, I heard the most terrifying screech come from the forest. It was raspy, but high-pitched. I know for a fact it wasn't human. I've heard stories from the channels on YouTube that often describe creatures that make weird noises that are sort of human but aren't. I heard it once more, but this time it was closer. In the morning, when I woke up, we explored all around. At 7 p.m., me, my sister, and my cousin got permission from our parents to go explore the forest. I was uneasy, considering I had heard creepy human-like noises in the night before, and it was already nearing night. The oldest cousin, Alex, who was 16, took a loaded pistol, a lighter, and a backpack of snacks. I carried a hunting knife and a flashlight. The cousin my age, Julia, took just a flashlight. My sister, Brianna, and the other cousin, Karina, who were 10, took some extra batteries and a small bag of candy each. We made our way across the bridge at the end of the street and back to the path of the side that the river crosses from the house. All of us began to hike to the top of the mountain. We made it to the top of Bald Mountain in an hour and a half. The view from 9,000 feet was incredible. At 8:55, Alex and I figured it was time to head down and ordered the group to the path. At this point, it was dark now and the sun had fully set. Julia and I had turned on our flashlights and shined them ahead as we walked. Some halfway down the mountain, which was about 45 minutes into the walk, I got the dreadful feeling you get when you know you're being watched and followed. Seconds later, something that was hiding in the bushes a few yards in the tree line that bordered the path ran off into our right. I brushed it off as some type of small animal, but 5 minutes after that incident, what we heard made me tingle with fear and my heart dropped to my stomach. The same horrifying screech from last night echoed through the forest from a mile or two away. I told everyone we needed to move faster, and we did. It went off again, but closer. Again, and closer. Whatever this thing was, it was moving faster than we were. We were full-on speed walking by then. That still wasn't fast enough because the screeching stopped and we heard loud steps 30 yards off to the right. I got the feeling of being watched again. Alex took his gun and fired 2 shots in the general direction of the steps. The creature backed off, but even though we thought he was gone, I still sensed that we were being watched. As the river came into sight, it caught me and everyone else by surprise. I heard the path gravel crunching behind us. I looked back into the darkness. I saw the outline of something that resembled a human on the path behind us, with about 200 yards of distance between us. I told Alex and his face went pale when he looked. The rest of the group quietly, and on 3, we all broke out into a run towards the river. Whatever that thing was, it was extremely fast. When we reached the river, there wasn't time to get into the bridge a quarter mile away. We jumped in and swam across the ice-cold water. It got to the river just as we made it to the bank and into the backyard. Julia and I shined our flashlights and finally got a good look at it. It was massive. It was a hairy creature that was about 7 feet tall. It had huge, razor-sharp claws like a bear's. Its eyes glowed red when the flashlight shined on them. Alex shot at it and it darted off with one final screech. We all looked at each other in pure terror, shock, and surprise. Alex explained everything to our parents. They didn't know what to make of it, and I'd never heard of anything like it. I'm thankful nothing happened to us and I noticed the creature behind us. If I didn't, I don't know what would have happened. The next time I stay at that cabin, though, I'm not going into those woods at night. For some context, this wasn't my personal experience, but my father's. We live in New England in a house next to a road surrounded by woods, barring some acres of clearing for farms and stuff like that. A few years ago, my dad was up pretty late one night or went outside on the porch to get some fresh air. He was leaning against the railing out on the road when he saw a humanoid figure emerge from the woods on the opposite side of the road and bound across it. He said that it went into our neighbor's property and through the woods beyond it. When it was out of sight, he could still hear it running through the brush. According to my dad, it was really lanky and skinny. It could have been about 7 feet tall. It had human-like features and was completely bald all over. He said that his skin looked like a whitish tan color, but he can't be 100% sure. We're all still a little spooked and curious about what this thing might be. So if anybody has any insight, I would love to know.